At 1:47 inches the morning, someone walked up to Nancy Guthrie's front door and removed the camera. Not unplugged it, removed it. Think about what that means for a second. This was not a power outage. This was not a glitch in the Wi-Fi signal. Someone physically reached up, found the mount, and took that camera down in the dark, quietly, deliberately, and then they went inside. Inside that house was an 4-year-old woman with a device the size of a playing card embedded in her chest, a pacemaker. It tracked every heartbeat, every rhythm, every irregular pulse, and it synced continuously with her iPhone, uploading a live record of the heart beating inside Nancy Guthrie's body. Not once a day, not once an hour, continuously. At 1:47 a.m., the camera went dark. And then, for 41 minutes, nothing. No alert, no call, no scream that any neighbor heard. Just 41 minutes of silence that no surveillance footage captured, that no witness has ever been able to fill, that law enforcement has never fully explained in public. And then, at 2:28 a.m., the pacemaker stopped syncing. Not the heart, the sync. But here is what that distinction means in the real world. A device designed to monitor every beat of a DS. Living heart does not simply go quiet in the middle of the night unless one of two things has happened. Either the phone it was connected to was destroyed or carried far out of range. Or something happened to Nancy herself. Between those two timestamps, 1:47 and 2:28, there is a 1-minute window. 41 minutes that changed everything. And when that pacemaker went silent, it did not just stop syncing. It stopped being the only device in that house that knew whether Nancy Guthrie was still alive. Stay with me through this entire video, because halfway through, I am going to show you something two former FBI agents said publicly that changes the entire shape of this case. Two people who spent careers inside federal investigations. Two independent analytical frameworks. One conclusion that neither of them is willing to say out loud. And once you hear it, you will not be able to unhear it. But to understand what that pacemaker silence means, you have to understand the woman behind it. And you have to understand the last few hours of the last normal night she ever had. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She lives in Catalina Foothills, a quiet semi-rural neighborhood just north of Tucson, Arizona. The streets are wide and sparse. Traffic at night is almost non-existent. The houses are set back from the road. Surveillance cameras are few, and the ones that exist face inward, toward driveways and front doors, not outward toward the street. It is the kind of neighborhood where people feel safe, where an 4-year-old woman living alone does not feel like a risk, where no one expects anything to happen, because nothing ever has. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of the Today Show on NBC. That detail matters for context, but it is not the story. The story is Nancy herself, mentally sharp, described by law enforcement as sharp as a tack, limited mobility, a heart condition requiring daily medication, a pacemaker implanted in her chest, doing quietly what her heart needed help to do. She is independent, she is capable, and she is, by every account, exactly the kind of woman who answers her door when someone knocks, because she has lived in that neighborhood long enough to feel like nothing bad could walk up her front path. On the evening of January 31st, a Saturday, she had dinner with family. Her daughter Annie had her over, the way families do on ordinary weekends. They ate, they talked. It was the kind of evening that leaves no trace, because there is nothing unusual to trace. At 9:48 p.m., Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni, drove Nancy home. He pulled into the driveway of her house. He waited. He watched her walk inside. He watched the garage door close behind her at 9:50 p.m. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw Nancy Guthrie safe. What happened between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m.? Nobody knows. 4 hours of ordinary darkness. 4 hours where, as far as anyone can tell, Nancy was inside her home, alone, the way she had been alone 1,000 nights before. And then 1:47 arrived, and everything that followed happened in 41 minutes. Now let us go inside those 41 minutes, because the details here are not just significant, they are surgical. At exactly 1:47 a.m., the Ring doorbell camera mounted at Nancy Guthrie's front door went offline. Not a lost signal, not a power flicker. The physical device was removed from its mount. Whoever did this did not stumble upon the camera and react. They came prepared. They knew where it was. They knew how to take it down without triggering an alarm, without drawing attention, without leaving the kind of noise that wakes neighbors. This was not improvised. This was rehearsed. And the question that hangs over that moment, the question that law enforcement has not answered publicly, is simple. How do you know the exact location of a private residential doorbell camera unless you have already been to that house? While the camera was being removed, something else was happening one house over. A neighbor's Ring camera system went dark. Not the entire system. Not every camera on the property. Only the cameras facing one specific direction. The side of the house that looks toward Nancy Guthrie's property. One side. The side that would have captured anyone approaching her home from the street. And that detail, that hyper-specific failure of one camera angle and not another, is not a coincidence. Coincidences do not have geometry. The next 41 minutes left no digital record, no footage, no audio, no movement triggered by any surviving sensor. Whatever happened inside that house, whoever was inside that house, moved through a window that had been deliberately cut out of the surveillance landscape of that neighborhood. And then, at 2:28 a.m., the pacemaker stopped syncing. When deputies from the Puma County Sheriff's Department arrived the following morning, they were not looking for a confused elderly woman who had wandered away. What they found on the front porch ended that possibility immediately. There was blood. Forensic testing would later confirm it belonged to Nancy Guthrie. Her evening heart medication was still on the kitchen counter, untouched. Her hearing aids were still in the house. She had not packed anything. She had not chosen to leave. Whatever happened on that porch happened fast, and it happened violently enough to leave a trace that no amount of preparation had fully cleaned away. John Miller, former Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence and Counterterrorism for the NYPD, former Assistant Director of the FBI, said this about that blood. The crime went wrong immediately, not as planned, not as expected, immediately. And what came after? The notes, the demands, the silence, may have been constructed not to recover Nancy Guthrie, but to cover what had already been done to her. What do you think? I want to hear from you directly. Do you believe the person who removed that camera had been to that house before? Because the evidence, the geometry of what was disabled and what was not, points in one direction. Drop your theory in the comments right now. Because this case is not solved yet, and the right set of eyes, even here, could matter. But before we get to the cover story, we need to talk about the one witness that nobody could remove, the one that was already inside her. Here is what most people do not understand about a modern pacemaker. It is not simply a device that regulates a heartbeat. It is a logging system. It records data continuously. Heart rate, rhythm irregularities, pauses, spikes, the precise moment a signal is detected, and the precise moment it stops. That data lives in two places. It lives in the device itself, implanted in Nancy Guthrie's chest, and it lives on a server maintained by the manufacturer, uploaded automatically every time the device syncs with a connected iPhone. This means something critical. Even if Nancy's iPhone was destroyed that night, even if it was smashed or thrown into the desert or driven across state lines, the server-side record of that pacemaker's activity does not disappear with it. It exists independently. It has a timestamp. It has a data trail that begins the moment the device was implanted and ends only when the device itself goes silent. At 2:28 a.m., the sync stopped. But what does the data from the minutes before that show? Was the heart beating normally at 2 a.m.? Was there a rhythm irregularity at 2:15? Was there a spike consistent with physical trauma at 2:20? These are not hypothetical questions. These are questions that a pacemaker data log could answer with clinical precision. And yet, in 41 days of public reporting on this case, not one outlet, not one press conference, not one official statement from the Puma County Sheriff's Department has confirmed that this data has been requested, retrieved, or analyzed. There are three possibilities. The first, the FBI has the data and is holding it close to protect the integrity of the investigation, the way federal agencies hold evidence that is central to a coming prosecution. The second, the data was not technically retrievable for reasons not yet made public. The third, and the one that should concern everyone following this case, nobody asked. Because here is the shape of this investigation. The DNA that was collected from the scene was not sent to Quantico, the FBI's primary forensic laboratory, the facility built specifically for cases of this magnitude. It was sent to a lab in Florida. Weeks passed, results were delayed, and the man responsible for that decision has a history that makes the word careless feel too charitable. His name is Chris Nanos. He is the sheriff of Puma County. and he is the reason this case may have taken longer to solve than it ever needed to. Chris Nanos joined the El Paso Police Department in 1976 at the age of 20. Within his first few years on the job, he began accumulating suspensions. Not one. Over 6 years, he collected 37 days of disciplinary suspension. For context, most police officers go entire careers without a single day of suspension. Nanos averaged more than 6 per year. The incident that ended his time in El Paso was not a paperwork violation. He kicked a suspect in the head hard enough to put that person in the ICU. He was forced out. He did not list the gap that followed on his resume. He added 2 years of fabricated experience to cover it. He eventually moved to Tucson, built a new career, and rose to become sheriff of Puma County. And when Nancy Guthrie disappeared on February 1st, 2026, he became the man in charge of the most watched missing persons investigation in America. Within 20 hours of deputies discovering the crime scene, Nanos released it. Standard protocol for a kidnapping investigation involving federal jurisdiction and active biological evidence preservation is a minimum of 48 to 72 hours. He released it in under 20. When FBI agents contradicted his characterization of the evidence on national television, he contradicted them back, publicly, in the middle of an active federal investigation. His last press conference was February 5th. For the 36 days that followed, while Nancy's family stood in front of cameras and begged for information, the Puma County Sheriff's Department said nothing. And then, when he finally spoke again, he said something that Ashley Banfield, the journalist who has covered this case more consistently than almost anyone, went back and cross-referenced against his own statements from day 2 of the investigation. The 2 statements were not simply different. They were direct contradictions. No clarification was offered. No correction was issued. No one in his department explained how the sheriff of an active federal kidnapping case could say the opposite of what he said 6 weeks earlier and expect that no one would notice. If you are watching Crime Doc Network for the first time, this is exactly what we do here. We do not just cover what happened. We cover what the system did with what happened and what the system got wrong, and why that matters for the people still waiting for answers. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because this case is moving, and when it breaks, you need to be here. But here is what Nanos's failures do not exist inside of. They do not exist in a vacuum. They exist inside a specific social and geographic web, a web that connects back to the night of January 31st, and specifically to the man who was the last person to see Nancy Guthrie alive. Tommaso Cioni drove Nancy home at 9:48 p.m. He watched the garage door close at 9:50, and from that moment forward, he has not made a single public statement. Not one. No press appearance alongside his wife Annie or his sister-in-law Savannah. No written statement released through legal counsel. No social media post expressing grief or calling for justice or asking for help finding his mother-in-law. In a case where the family has stood in front of cameras and begged repeatedly, the man who was last with Nancy Guthrie has maintained a silence that is, at minimum, unusual. Tommaso Cioni moves in the music world. He has for years. And inside that world, connected to him across 19 years of shared history, is a man named Dominic Evans. Evans has felony convictions for burglary and robbery. His height, his build, his facial hair, and his physical profile match every detail in the FBI's publicly released suspect description. A tattoo on the right wrist, a pinky ring worn over a glove, a black mustache, distinctive eyebrows, and a profile that places him in his 30s or 40s. Every detail, not most of them, every single one. Evans has not been named a suspect. He has not been named a person of interest. He has not been publicly connected to this investigation in any official capacity. And yet, the overlap between his physical profile and the FBI's suspect description is not a loose resemblance. It is a point-by-point match. Then there is Derek Kayla, another name from Tommaso's music scene. Kayla was arrested for sending a ransom text, but not to Savannah Guthrie. Not to the FBI tip line, not to a general family contact. He sent it directly to Tommaso and Annie's personal phone number, the private number of the man who drove Nancy home and the daughter she had dinner with that night. To reach that number, Derek Kayla did not need to search. He already had it, which means the distance between Kayla and the Cioni household was not the distance between a stranger and a celebrity's family. It was the distance between people who already knew each other. The FBI went to the restaurant where Savannah Guthrie had filmed a Today Show segment with her mother. They went and they asked questions. What they were looking for, what they found, has not been made public. But Tracy Walder, a former FBI special agent and CIA officer, said this about the nature of the crime. It is just too targeted. Someone who knew this neighborhood, someone who had surveilled that house, someone connected through obsession or retaliation to Savannah Guthrie specifically. Targeted, surveilled, connected. 3 words that point not toward a random predator, but toward a circle. And somewhere inside that circle, sitting in an FBI evidence bay in Tucson for over a month, was a blue Honda CR-V that may contain the most important physical evidence in this entire investigation. The blue Honda CR-V belonged to Annie Guthrie. It was the last vehicle Nancy rode in before she walked through her garage door and into the final night anyone can account for. The FBI seized it, and then they kept it. For more than a month, federal agents worked through that car with the kind of methodical patience that does not get applied to vehicles that contain nothing. They swabbed surfaces, they cataloged fibers, they scanned electronics. They pulled apart the interior and the trunk and documented every microscopic trace left behind by anyone who had ever sat inside it. 2 retired FBI agents, speaking independently on national television, said the same thing about the length of that seizure. The fact that the vehicle had not been returned to the family after more than a month defied every standard protocol they had ever seen. In a standard investigation, a vehicle held as evidence is processed, documented, and either retained as a key exhibit or released. 30-plus days of continued analysis means one of 2 things. Either the evidence inside that car is extraordinarily complex and requires extended forensic work, or something inside it keeps opening new lines of inquiry that investigators cannot close. Think about what that second possibility means. A piece of evidence that keeps generating new questions is not a dead end. It is a map. Every new question it opens is a direction the investigation had not yet traveled. And for over a month, that blue Honda was generating directions. The car has now been returned. Annie Guthrie has it back. And, in the logic of federal evidence procedure, that return could mean one of 2 things. Either the FBI extracted everything it needed and no longer requires the physical vehicle, or the forensic work is complete, the chain of custody is documented, and the car itself is now a sealed exhibit in a case file that is moving toward prosecution. Both interpretations point the same direction, forward. The FBI is also working a parallel thread that has received almost no public attention: Walmart data. The clothing worn by the suspect captured in surveillance footage near the abduction window has been traced to specific retail sources. Federal investigators have obtained purchase records. They are cross-referencing those records against the physical profile of the suspect, against the digital footprint of anyone in the suspect's geographic radius, against the timeline of purchases in the weeks before February 1st. Clothing bought in cash at a Walmart register still leaves a record. The register logs the transaction. The store camera logs the buyer. And if the buyer used any form of digital payment, any loyalty card, any app-based purchase, the data trail does not end at the register. It extends backward into an identity. Nancy Guthrie needs her heart medication every single day. She has a pacemaker. She is 84 years old. Every day this case remains unsolved is not an abstraction. It is a day with real biological weight. If you have ever loved someone who depends on daily medication to stay alive, you already know what that sentence means without needing it explained. Share this video, not for the algorithm, not for the channel, because the FBI tip line is 1800-CALL-FBI. The reward is $1.2 million. And somewhere in someone's life right now is a person sitting with information that could end this. That person has a family member who knows, a friend who suspects, a conscience that has been compressing under 6 weeks of weight. Share this, because the right person seeing it at the right moment is not impossible. It has happened before. And in this case, with this much pressure building from this many directions, it may be closer than anyone publicly knows. Closer. That word. That specific word is where this entire investigation pivots. On March 10th, Jennifer Coffindaffer posted 2 words on X: half glass full. If you do not know who Jennifer Coffindaffer is, here is what matters. She is a retired FBI special agent. She worked inside the institutional machinery that is now pursuing whoever took Nancy Guthrie. She has tracked this case publicly from day one, posting analysis on X, speaking to Newsweek, appearing across national broadcasts. And she has a record in this investigation of saying exactly what she sees, not what sounds hopeful, not what the family needs to hear, what she actually sees. When the unidentified vehicle near the abduction window had not been identified, she said clearly, "That is concerning." When the DNA challenges were confirmed publicly by Sheriff Nanos, she addressed them directly. She did not soften the language. She did not suggest things were moving well when the evidence suggested they were not. In 41 days of public commentary on this case, she had never once used language that could be characterized as optimistic. And then, on March 10th, she wrote, "half glass full." To understand the weight of those 3 words coming from that specific person, you need to understand what she was reading. She was not reading press releases. She was not reading local news. She was reading the behavioral signature of a federal investigation in its final phase. She was reading the pattern of how the FBI moves when it has enough to act, but has not yet acted. And that pattern has specific tells. The first tell: civilian search organizations were turned away. EC Search and the United Cajun Navy, 2 of the most capable volunteer search operations in the country, offered their resources and were declined. Jennifer Coffindaffer asked publicly why, and then she answered her own question. When law enforcement no longer needs large-scale ground searches, it is typically because the search phase is over. Not because they gave up, because they already know something about where Nancy is that makes a ground search redundant. The second tell: Sheriff Nanos, in an interview that aired on the Today Show in early March, used a word that former FBI intelligence analyst Jennifer Dolbler, who spent 13 years inside the Bureau, described as atypical for law enforcement officials in active federal investigations. Nanos said investigators were definitely closer, not possibly closer, not cautiously optimistic, definitely. Law enforcement officials do not use that word carelessly when federal charges are being built in parallel. That word is a signal. It means the direction is no longer uncertain. It means the distance to the suspect has been measured and it is shrinking. The third tell: the structural parallel that Coffindaffer herself cited throughout this investigation. Brian Kohberger, 4 University of Idaho students murdered in November 2022. A suspect who planned carefully, left little behind, and moved confidently through the weeks after the crime, believing he had not been identified. Then the DNA came back. The cell tower data converged. And in January 2023, approximately 5 weeks after the murders, law enforcement arrived at his parents' home in Pennsylvania, found a single Q-tip in the trash, matched the DNA to Kohberger's father, and the case broke. Week 5. The Idaho case broke in Week 5. The Nancy Guthrie investigation was in Week 6 when Coffindaffer wrote those words. The DNA is being processed. The cell phone records are being analyzed. The Walmart data is in hand. The clothing is being traced. The task force of 4 detectives and 1 sergeant has been working full-time out of the FBI's Tucson field office, single case, since the beginning. And the woman who has never once called this investigation close when it was not close, looked at the aggregate of all those signals and wrote, "half glass full." That is not sentiment. That is a professional reading of a pattern she has seen before from the inside. And that reading points directly at the question this entire case keeps circling back to. What actually happened on that porch? There are 2 versions of this case, the version that was reported and the version that the evidence describes. They are not the same version. The reported version is a kidnapping. An 84-year-old woman taken from her home in the middle of the night, held somewhere, her return contingent on a ransom that was never paid and never formally negotiated. That is the frame that was placed around this case from the beginning. Law enforcement investigated it as a kidnapping. Media covered it as a kidnapping. The public understood it as a kidnapping. But consider what a real kidnapping looks like in the evidentiary record. A real kidnapping produces proof of life, not eventually, quickly, because the leverage of a living hostage is the only leverage a kidnapper has. A ransom demand without proof of life is not a negotiation, it is a performance. And in 41 days of this investigation, not one photograph, not one voice recording, not one word written in Nancy Guthrie's own hand has surfaced to confirm that she was alive after she was taken from that porch. Not once. John Miller, former Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence and Counterterrorism for the NYPD, former Assistant Director of the FBI, CNN's most decorated law enforcement analyst, said this: "The blood on that porch is the key denominator. It tells us the crime went wrong immediately. And what came after, the notes, the demands, the silence, may have been constructed to cover what was done to Nancy. Not to recover her, re-engineered. That was the word he used. The crime may have been re-engineered into a kidnapping after something went terribly, irrevocably wrong. Tracy Walder, former FBI special agent and CIA officer, approached the same evidence from a different analytical framework and arrived at the same unstated destination. She said, "It is just too targeted. Someone who knew this neighborhood, someone who had surveilled that house, someone connected through obsession or retaliation to Savannah Guthrie specifically." And she said she does not believe this was a burglary gone wrong. But she also said something else. She said she believes this crime happened because of something Savannah Guthrie did. Not something Nancy did. Savannah. Two independent experts. Two different careers. Two different analytical lenses. One conclusion that neither is willing to say in plain language. Because in the absence of proof of life, in the presence of ransom notes that stopped without explanation, in the context of blood on a porch, and a pacemaker that went silent at 2:28 a.m., the word kidnapping may be the cover story rather than the crime. And if it is the cover story, then the pacemaker data becomes the most important evidence in this entire investigation. Because if that data shows a cardiac event before 2:28 a.m., if it shows a rhythm irregularity consistent with trauma in those 41 minutes, then the timeline of the kidnapping narrative does not just weaken, it collapses. And everything built on top of it, the ransom notes, the demands, the silence, falls with it. The FBI tip line has received over 23,000 submissions. More than 700 were classified as credible. Every one of those tips represents pressure on someone who is already living under the weight of what they know. Former FBI agent Andrew Bringle said it plainly. These cases are solved when one conspirator decides they want out. One person, one call. 6 weeks of FBI intensity does not get lighter. It compounds. And $1.2 million sitting on the other side of one anonymous phone call is not an abstraction to someone whose silence is the only thing standing between their current life and a federal indictment. The task force is operational. The forensic pipeline is running. The digital evidence is being cross-referenced across multiple parallel tracks simultaneously. And a retired FBI special agent who spent her career reading the behavioral signature of investigations exactly like this one, looked at the aggregate of all of it, and wrote 3 words she had not written once in 41 days. Behind every piece of analysis in this video is a family. Savannah, Annie, Cameron. They have stood in front of cameras and begged. They have placed flowers outside their mother's home and written a card that reads, "Though we are surrounded by so much darkness, our love burns bright." They are waiting. They have been waiting for 41 days. And somewhere in someone's life right now is the person who knows exactly where Nancy Guthrie is, sitting with the full weight of 6 weeks and $1.2 million on the other side of one phone call. Her name is Nancy Guthrie. She is 84 years old. She depends on medication that was left untouched on her kitchen counter the morning she was gone. And someone watching this video right now may know where she is. If this breakdown gave you something the news did not, hit like. It takes 1 second, and it tells Crime Doc Network that this work matters. Subscribe and turn on every notification, because when this case breaks, and every signal says it is close, we will be here with the full breakdown before anyone else. And if you want to go deeper on the suspect web in this case, specifically what the connection between Dominic Evans, Derek, Kayla, and Tommaso Cioni actually means for the direction of this investigation, that video is right here. The evidence is darker than you think. I will see you there.